Wally, a few additional pieces of legislation that we'll be tracking during the session, which kicks off later today. Besides paid leave and alcohol tax increases, one is HB 41. That's the clean fuel standard, the latest iteration of the clean fuel standard. They just can't get enough micromanaging of our use of automobiles. Obviously, we have the EV mandates, and we'll have a little bit more on that in a second. But uh, this clean fuel standard, it's the concept that's been introduced in sessions past. The idea, you'll never guess what they do with this one. They empower the Environmental Improvement Board,
To do
yay,
whatever they
to
want.
do whatever they want in terms of mandating the various usage of predominantly biofuels like corn-based ethanol and others in our gas tanks. That's HB 41, HB 37. Christine Chandler, representative, wants to limit New Mexico's capital gains tax deductions. So if you sell a house, if you sell stocks, she wants to give the state a greater proportion of that. So heaven forbid you make a good investment or you live in your house and the price goes up, give the state more money. Again,
Because they need it, Paul. We're suffering
we
a
are. The state is out rattling its tin cup like so many homeless on the streets of Albuquerque, right there on the street corners at every interstate and every crossing. So yeah, we definitely need more money for the state government. Speaking of more money for the state government, and this one gets to the heart of the matter, quite frankly. Although there are multiple bills along this broad line, and that broad line is to reevaluate or reopen the New Mexico Oil and Gas Act. HB 48 would specifically increase royalty rates. Royalties are a fancy way of saying taxes go up on the oil and gas produced in New Mexico. But there are several efforts that will be undertaken this session to open the Oil and Gas Act and to do all manner of different things with regard to oil and gas regulations. And I will give you just a few of those because this is obviously the source of so much of the revenue. And we have that bill, again, the bill to increase royalty rates, HB 48. Other bills includes phasing out freshwater use in oil and gas operations entirely, locking the state's 98% gas capture target into law, increasing well setbacks from sensitive locations like homes, schools, and hospitals, increase bonding fees to reduce state liability for orphaned wells, increase fees and penalties, direct penalties collected to well reclamation funds instead of the state's general fund, and tightening the transfer rules for old wells that could end up being abandoned by new owners. So, opening the Oil and Gas Act, which is an old law that's been on the books since 1935, could result in all types of shenanigans, and these are just a few of them. But this is kind of the first foray I've seen, at least in my time at the Rio Grande Foundation, into really attacking the heart of New Mexico's economic largesse.
Yeah, they're. It's almost like they want to kill the golden goose. Maybe that's their goal, but a few points: raising royalties. That royalties are what you pay to produce gas on somebody else's mineral rights, and that would apply presumably to the state land office, but it would only apply to new leases. It wouldn't apply to existing ones because unless they're going to break their contract, which I don't even think that's proposed. Maybe the impact of that wouldn't be as great as it could. But here's the thing, that would tend to make producing on state trust lands more expensive than on private lands and even federal lands, relatively speaking, and less money to the state of New Mexico because on state trust lands, all of the royalties go to the state, whereas if it's on federal land, about roughly, it's a little less, but roughly half goes to the federal government, half goes to the state of New Mexico. And then this whole idea about funds for orphan whales. You know what, Paul? Those have been out there for a long time. There's already programs that have done that. But guess what they did? They took those monies and put them in a trust fund in a lockbox. Oh, wait, no, they didn't. They put them in the general fund and spent them. And then when you need those funds, they're not there. So this is one of those, they kind of let the horse out of the barn once, and maybe they're trying to get back in. But the key is without the discipline to use those funds for what they're designed to be used for, it's just another general tax and won't necessarily solve the problem at the time it's going. Um, yeah, so there's a lot going on here, and I just think it's I don't know, what is it? It's the progressive religion that we need to punish the oil and gas industry, because that's what is going to drive the move away from fossil fuels, as opposed to maybe it's just drive away from fossil fuels that are produced right here in New Mexico, right here in the United States, to other countries. And it's not that many years ago, Paul, that we had that situation. So there is this belief, and it's one of those. Call it what you will, that fossil fuels are on the phase out by 2040, 2050, whatever. We're going to be carbon zero, and fossil fuels will be a thing of the past. We're not seeing that. We're not seeing it in oil and gas. We're not seeing it in coal. And we are seeing some reductions here in the United States, but the rest of the world's certainly going in the other direction. So if global warming is real, it's like anything we do is being offset 10 to 100 times more by others. So, but that doesn't mean we're not going to basically keep poking the bear and keep torturing the oil and gas industry in New Mexico with these laws and regulations. It just seems like that's almost like the sport of the Democratic Party right now in the United States and in New Mexico.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenging session, and we'll be uh, reporting further on important bills, mostly, maybe not 99%, but I think a high upper 90s percentile of these will be bad ideas. I expect very little good to come out of the 2024 legislative session. Well, Wally, as usual, on this EV talk show that we have created, lots to discuss relating to the governor of New Mexico's very, very favoritist technology. We will start with, real quickly, board member of the Rio Grande Foundation, Julie Wright. Not to be confused with Carol Wight. Julie Wright had an article on Saturday. It was a response to one of the liberal columnists on environmental matters, Judith Polich, touting EVs and purporting to clear up some EV disinformation. I won't go into everything that Polich gets wrong and that Wright corrects her on, but I will say simply that Polich claims that EVs have no emissions. That's a very funny and inaccurate statement, because first and foremost, as she does acknowledge in her articles, EVs currently run on the grid, and New Mexico's grid still is dominated by not just coal, but oil, or actually gas, not natural gas. And there's a lot of other issues with this particular article and perspective relating to EVs, but you'll have to just read Julie's article at Heirs of Enchantment or Rio Grande Foundation.org for more details. Other EV news: the governor was just over the moon last week with her big announcement of $68 million in federal funds from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, another debt-fueled bill to spend more money, this time on EV charging stations. $68 million for New Mexico, $623 million for 47 projects in 22 states and Puerto Rico. we don't have, the journal has some good reporting on this, but does not have thorough details on exactly how many of these EVs are being deployed and exactly where. The one notable detail we have is Santa Fe County will use $3.3 million in grant funding to build 33 fast chargers and level 2 charging stations in 13 locations. I did a little quick math here. Bear with me. The higher math
Yes.
here.
Yeah.
3.3 million for 33 fast chargers. That's 100 grand per. Now that's about on par with Western New Mexico. Fast chargers are the top tier, the level 3 charging stations. Now,
And you need to be very careful where you put those because you can overtake the capability of the feeders in a electric transmit distribution system relatively easily.
yeah. So not a lot of details. We will be digging into this once the Department of Transportation provides a little bit more specifics on where these funds are going. I am confident that we will be overpaying for the EV charging network. Again, baseline, there's never a reason for taxpayers nationally or at the state level to be forced to pay for fueling for people's vehicles. We don't use tax dollars to pay for gas stations. We should have the same standard for vehicle charging for electric vehicles. If they are a good technology, they should be deployed without tax dollars.
Yes. But they aren't good enough to be deployed without tax dollars right now. So we have subsidies on the cars. We are paying for a lot of charging stations, and yet there are problems. So, and these problems are going to remain. We've seen a real market pushback against EVs. The demand is softening. The car companies are highly concerned. Those that are buying them are having issues, in terms of reliability, cost. And I was just trying to think, well, where are we on this thing? And maybe the closest I can come up with is I won't call this version 1 of EVs. That probably happened in the 1910s or the 1890s, whenever that was. But let's call this version 2.0 of the EVs. I think this is kind of where, Paul, do you remember the old PDAs, the personal digital assistants? You could put your contacts in
Yep.
this special purpose device. Well, do EVs work? Yeah, they kind of work, kind of like the PDAs work, but boy, a smartphone is a lot better device, and there is a need for market acceptance for a lot of improvement in the electric vehicles in terms of charging time, the weight, the batteries. There's a lot of things, and people are working on that now. But we're taking we're taking a C minus technology and trying to turn it into the A plus universal rollout, which anytime we do that in the past, there are problems, and we're certainly starting to see them. And unlike places like California, where there's more density, there's a lot more issues that make electric vehicles, popular amongst people. We're here in this little rural state of ours, trying to be like the I don't know, our neighbors to the west, who always do everything right, California. And we'll see how this goes. These laws are, interestingly, not all that difficult to pass, but they're pretty difficult to make work correctly, given all the challenges we're seeing right now.
Yeah, a little bit more on EVs. According to reports this week, Hertz is the rental car company, of course, is selling a third of its U.S. electric vehicle fleet and reinvesting in gas-powered vehicles due to weak demand and high repair costs for its battery-powered options. 20,000 EVs being sold by Hertz. So I guess, if you want a cheap electric vehicle, normally rental companies, if you expect some level of wear and tear because people drive those cars. Rental car companies maybe a little bit less carefully than they drive their own, but anyway,
Always,
so
always like the additional insurance. So
yeah, so that's of course important, as well as news reports from this week. I'm specifically looking at a Fox Business story on Yahoo News. It's been cold in a lot of the country here in the last several days. Chicago area Tesla charging stations lined with dead cars in the freezing cold. So, what is going on? And we know, and we've talked about the issues with battery performance in cold weather. This is no secret. You've seen the commercials for the traditional gas-powered vehicle batteries. You're sitting alone in a snow-covered, cold parking lot. Those batteries do not perform as well. But of course, that's a one-time deal. And if you need a jump, you can rely on some helpful friend or AAA or something like that. But in Chicago here, desperate Tesla owners were seen trying to charge their vehicles with no luck amid frigid temperatures. Charging stations turned into car graveyards as temperatures dropped to the negative double digits. And apparently, the issue is not just the duration of the charge, but the fact that for some reason the charging units were not actually getting the charge to the vehicles. So, if you show up expecting to be able to charge your vehicle with a rapidly declining battery on an electric vehicle, you are going to uh, possibly have that vehicle completely dead if the charging station does not work. There's not another charging station always down the street, even in a big city like Chicago. So, Tesla is known for having some of the better charging units out there. Don't know what the reason is, but certainly a lot of dead vehicles in a charging station. That's no fun, and more bad publicity for the governor's chosen form of technology.
yeah, a couple of points, Paul. One, traditional batteries for combustion engines, they refer to cold cranking amps, where they do it
Yes.
at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 18 Celsius, as I recall. And the reason for that is that's when you need the battery to work. That's when it's put at its biggest stress. So, very cold and batteries in general is not a good thing. And so it's certainly not a surprise that that electric vehicles, which are battery only, have these issues. And the other is the duration of charge. And one of the things I've been, a couple of stories that I've read over the weekend talk about places in remote areas. They find a charging station, but it's we've had the Arctic blast here in much of the U.S., and so you kind of have to have your heater on while you're charging so you won't freeze to death. Well, that's using a lot of the power that's coming in to your batteries right then, so it's taking a very, very long time to do it. But there's a lot of optimization that's gone over the years for cars, and very cold, very wet, and very hot have all proven to be big challenges for EVs to this point. And again, back to we're at EV 2.0, maybe at EV 3.0 or 4.0, some of these problems will be improved upon. And it's back to what I've always said. It's a great third or fourth family car for a lot of people, but there's a lot of situations where it's not necessarily going to be an ideal for many car and truck consumers out there.
Yeah. So that does it for our EV specific talk of this week. I'm sure we'll have much more to report on next week. Uh, but in transportation news, which is related, because you know what I think the radical left and the environmental groups would want ideally is for mass transit to be essentially the only transportation method available. Uh, but they've kind of settled on electric vehicles as the next best option. Whether they're environmentally friendly or not is a side issue. There's additional control to be had there. But when it comes to mass transit, we've seen since COVID-19, the pandemic really cut into ridership of mass transit systems. And the Rail Runner, New Mexico Rail Runner Express, is no different. So we did see a rebound, however, in 2023. 586,309 people hopped aboard the Rail Runner in calendar year 2023. That is up from 2022 and 21 and 2020, all of which were impacted in some way, shape, or form by COVID-19. Now, a year ago, Wally, you and I were talking about the governor making her final push to get the state workers back into their offices. She seems to have succeeded in that in some way, shape, or form. However, the year before COVID, 2019, 744,000 people rode the train. So now we're 20% down from that. And I think kind of that the low hanging fruit, so to speak. This is like Joe Biden talking about all the jobs he's created. Yeah, if you measure rail runner ridership by 2020 at 143,462, yeah, ridership's gangbusters. It's practically triple from 2020. But we got to look at the full lifespan of this train. And back in 2010, 2011, 2012, we're talking 1.2 million boardings on the Rail Runner. Even 2019 was way down from that, maybe about 40% decrease since the salad days of the Rail Runner. And now here we are at 2023, 586,309. Wally, I don't know how long of a window we have to make bets for these particular things, but we'll start with next year. Do you expect Rail Runner ridership to continue its rebound, to basically stall, and or when do you see the Rail Runners ridership encountering pre-pandemic levels?
Yeah, I would think if it doesn't happen within the next 3 to 5 years, it'll never happen. And while, Paul, I do think that there are more state employees that are going back to the office. I've heard of a lot of people, both in state government and certainly in federal and local governments, that are kind of some days we go in and some days we don't. And the big environmental, the big reducer of travel expenses is not turned into be buses and trains. It's turned into be Zoom and Microsoft Teams and digital things like that. So I'll say it's probably going to go up a little bit over this next year, but I don't think it's probably going to go up a lot. And at that level, it's still a mighty, mighty expensive per commuter mile system that we have going. Early on, they did a thing about for the price that we're putting the train in on capital and operating expenses, we could buy every group of 4 people a Toyota Prius every few years and have it be cheaper. And so we're kind of looking at that same, turning a very, very bad return on investment, this train, into something that's maybe not quite as abysmal as during the COVID time. But I don't think we're going to see it go gangbusters ever. I think we're kind of in the realm of where we'll be for the rest of its life.
Yeah, I agree that we may see another modest increase, but I think we've largely topped out in terms of the return to the rail runner. I don't even think we'll hit 2019 levels anywhere in the near future. Maybe years from now, and I don't do bets 5 years in advance, but that's my estimation, and that's assuming all kinds of different factors come into play. Yeah, on one hand, I think certainly a lot of jobs, and I have zero confidence that the state of New Mexico can adequately figure out who needs to be in the office and who needs to be not in the office or can be not in the office,
Mhm.
and how to manage them. I have somewhat little confidence that average corporations can figure these things out. And I think a lot of them are going through some very difficult challenges with that right now. But yeah, if you're talking environmentally speaking, you know, you could definitely have done a lot more for the environment to give, say, tax credits for companies that emphasize remote work and that kind of thing. They might be able to factor in the somewhat lower productivity with the overall benefit that comes to the environment. But again, these are not the things that the government can and will focus their attention on because they're too effective. The
Yeah.
government has to do things that people want nothing to do, kicking and screaming, that they look at and say, "Do I have to commute an hour and a half each way to Santa
Right.
Fe?"
Yes.
That's much more along the lines of where government wants to spend its resources, and transit in general, whether it's here in New Mexico or across the country, has simply languished and will continue to languish in the post-pandemic world.
Yeah, if we're really serious about doing this, and Paul, guess what? This has happened a little bit, even without any effort. In fact, effort to the contrary. If you really want to reduce commuting in New Mexico, is move more and more state government functions from Santa Fe to Albuquerque. Already started to
Very
happen
true.
largely. And then two, hey, Albuquerque and Bernalillo County, uh, make it easier to develop housing. Take away some of the horrible policies. Those would pay. Those would be 50 rail runners worth of switching of commuting just to do a few things like that.
Yeah, and even better for me would be to, I don't know, put those government workers on like a 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. schedule so that they commute at times when the roads are not busy, and that would
Yeah.
save all kinds of gasoline from being used on our interstates. Now, they might have some government employees who don't want to commute into work at 4:30 or 4:45 in the morning, but these are the prices that have to be paid for the environment, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Paul, I've worked in a couple of corporations that the operations folks, boy, they love coming to work at 5:30 or 6. The office employees, they like 8:30 or 9 a lot more. But maybe that uh, again, just ideas here. There may be some operations people that actually like that early thing, but their bosses would have to get to work in time to manage them to make that a reality as well.
Exactly. All right. Now, revisiting our land commissioner and the report recently on the land commissioner's office's revenues, the Office of the Land Commissioner recently released fiscal year 2023 report showing that 97% of the state's land office revenue came from oil and gas. And we talked about those data. And then I realized, hey, I have an old chart from 2018 showing that the oil and gas industry uh, generated a majority of the land office's revenue. And further breaking things down, interestingly enough, and this is, I think, where you get, especially with regard to the land office and being managed by what we all acknowledge is a progressive Democrat, Stephanie Garcia Richard. Uh, she has to message, she has to talk about wind and solar, but in reality, economics still uh, are the factor that defines what revenues come into her office. So back in 2018, the year before she took office, oil and gas generated a mere 93% of the land office's revenue. That's now 97%, according to the latest report. Grazing was 1.3%, minerals 1.12, business leases 0.72, rights of way 1.080, other 2.11, and then that Vaunted renewable energy back in 2018 was 0.01%. You know, we don't have the breakdown of all of that information for this year, but I can tell you, Wally, that renewables rocketed up from 0.01% to 0.016%. I'm sorry, 0.16. So 0.01 to 0.16. It really, renewables are kicking butt and taking names at the state land office. With any luck, at some point they will hit the level of business leases or grazing, although grazing dwarfs their revenues from wind and solar. So I think the fascinating thing is oil and gas, even as of 2018, kind of the beginning of the oil and gas boom, now it's even bigger. I mean, you run into a law of diminishing returns. I mean, 97% is very, very high. And then some of these other sources remain bigger than the renewable industry.
Yes, and Paul, the way I think about it is that okay. We talked earlier. They're looking at potentially raising royalties on state trust lands to get even more money out of oil and gas. Well, they cannot charge very many royalties or rents or anything for renewable energy projects because they're already have a tough time being economic, even with every kind of subsidy that there is. So, what is it going to take to get wind and solar and batteries to the point where they could pay anywhere close to even a rental rate, much less a royalty rate for extraction in oil and gas? And the answer is, I just don't think we can get there from here. And so you can talk about all you want to do with regard to how you manage state trust lands and encouraging renewable energy, and maybe that is part of your role. But the money that's going to come from that in my lifetime or that of my children, grandchildren, and so on to the seventh generation, I have a feeling is going to be very inconsequential.
Yep, I completely agree. So we'll leave it there, and appreciate the time and your interest in these issues, dear listeners. We will be updating you on, of course, the legislative session, but also other issues will crop up undoubtedly during the weeks ahead with regard to New Mexico politics. I'll be up in Santa Fe. We have our Freedom Index vote tracking website that'll be coming up. And once votes are happening on the floor of the respective houses, we will have information about those. And then, of course, the governor, her State of the State address later on today. I'm on pins and needles. I have no idea. I'm sure she's going to turn over a new leaf of free market and limited government support. So, all right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.